Okay, so you're getting into Python for Maya, and you want to create some UIs for your tools. Okay, so by UI I mean like a user interface, so a window with text fields and sliders and bits and pieces to define parameters that your command can that your VFX tool or whatever it is you're creating inside of Maya can follow. Okay, so to create a UI, basically I kind of start off with this sort of template here. Okay, so let me just talk you through it. Um, Obviously, we've got to do the import. Now, I'm using a class-orientated approach. You can get away with not using a class-orientated approach, but actually it makes things surprisingly complicated, okay? So the reason I want to use a class-orientated approach, and basically what I'm doing is I'm representing the window as a single class, and that means that all the kind of attributes that the user sets inside of that window are stored as bits of data inside of the class, and then all the buttons that are inside of that UI can call functions which are also specified within that class, and obviously those functions can then obviously call on the data that the users set within that UI, i.e. within the class, to do things. Okay, so everything's kind of self-contained. That's the key part of it. Okay, and it makes it much easier if you use a class-orientated approach. So we need to give our class a name. So I've called this. What I'll do is I will just post this starting point up as well as a bit of text in the description. So hopefully you can just kind of copy and paste this from the description, and that kind of gives you a starting point. Okay, so you need to have so you need to give the class a name. Okay, so I've called it mr underscore window. I always like to avoid put mr in front of it because it avoids any kind of confusion with other objects that might be called window. Window's not like an unusual thing to call something, and so just to avoid any kind of confusion, I like to just put my initials on the front of things. So that's just a practice I like to do. Just avoid any conflict with existing classes or functions that might be called window. Okay, great. And then this is pretty standard. This is just okay. So essentially, all I'm just doing here is just saying I want to base this class on a blank object, i.e., an object that has no attributes or functions specified, and I'm going to obviously specify my own. Okay. So now what we want to do is we want to define the constructor. Okay, so the constructor is basically the function that's called whenever we create an instance of the class. So if we look here, this is all defining the class, and then this line of code here. In fact, I might just separate it out a little bit more. But this line of code here is creating creating an instance of the class. So imagine this is like defining. I want to say like defining a function. I don't want to cause confusion with that analogy, but imagine we're defining the class here to create an instance of that class. I'm calling the class here effectively. Okay, so here I'm saying, hey, I've got a variable called myWindow, and I want that window to equal an instance of this class. So whenever we create an instance of the class, this function here is automatically ran. Okay, and it's this function here that kind of creates the window. Okay. So here you can so hopefully most of these commands are going to kind of make sense. So what I'm doing here is I'm defining a set of attributes. These are all going to be stored within the instance of the class. So by going self, that means we're going to store it within the class. Okay, so if I go, within the class. Okay, so if I go myWindow.window, I will be able to call up this piece of information here. I'll demonstrate that in a moment. I don't want to get too much into talking about what classes are, but yeah. Okay, so when I'm going self dot here, I'm defining attributes. Okay, so this is of the class. So self.window in this case is going to be mr window. So we're just giving the window a name. You won't see that, but you need to give the window a name. Okay, and then we're going to go self.title. This is the title that we're going to display. Okay. And again, I'm going to go self.size. So this will be the size of the window. Okay, so these are just attributes that I'm setting. Okay, now what we need to do is we need to check if there's any windows with the same name open. Okay, so what we're doing is just going, we're going commands.window, and we're just going self.window exists equal true. Okay, so we're just saying, does this, we're running the command. What we're doing here is we're running the window command that's part of this Maya library to create a window within Maya. Okay, but actually what we're doing is we're not running it to create a window, we're running it to check if a window exists. And the window that we're checking to see if it exists or not will be a window that's called whatever we've put into the attribute self.window, i.e. in this case mrWindow. Okay, obviously you can call it whatever you want, and you can put your own titles in there, and you can put your own dimensions in there. Okay. Keep in mind that these dimensions are kind of initial dimensions, and they're kind of largely ignored once the user resizes the window. So just keep that in mind in terms of what you might be expecting from that. Okay, but again, these are just attributes. These aren't defining anything to do with the window just yet. These need to be applied in these commands here. Okay, so we're seeing if that window exists. If it does exist, remove the window. Okay, so we're just going to go commands delete UI, a UI with that name. Okay, and we're going to delete it. Brilliant. Okay. Now what we want to do is we want to create the window. So now that we've done that and we know there aren't any windows with the same name there, we want to create a window. So we're going to go self.window equals commands.window, and this time it's just going to construct a new window for us. So what we're going to do is going to give the window a name. So that will be self.window, i.e. this bit. Okay, and then we're going to give it a title based on self.title, which will be this bit. And we're going to go width height. So the width height attribute obviously just specifies the width and the height. Just puts them into one attribute. Okay, using this kind of layout in brackets here, which is called a tuple. Okay, so that will be the width, that will be the height. Okay, and you would just obviously see it's referencing self.size, which is obviously this variable here. Okay. So hopefully that kind of makes sense what we're doing. And then the final command is cmds.showWindow, which is basically show the window. Okay, so let's run that. Kaboom. And what we get is an empty window called Cube Creator. Brilliant. Okay. Now what we want to do is we want to actually put some user interfaces inside of this window. Okay, so to put some user interfaces in, we need to put the UI between this command here where we've created the window and this command here where we're displaying the window, because obviously if I put it in after we've displayed the window, it won't appear because we've already displayed the window. Okay, so I want to specify in here what user interface elements I want in this window. Okay, so I'm going to start off with some text. Okay, so I'll put the title in there. So I'm going to go cmds.text. Okay, so this is just basically put some text in there, and I'll just use the title that we've created, self.title. Okay, then what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a separator in there that's just basically a line underneath the title, just separates the title from the rest of the user interface. So I'm going to go separator. Hopefully I'll type it in correctly. No, I haven't. Let's just make sure that separator is one of those words that trips me up. Okay, so I'm just going to go, I'm going to specify a height. Okay, here we go. Let's run that. We've got an error in there. Line 20. Controls must have, oh yes. Okay, so what I haven't done is specify a layout. That is very, very important. So I've kind of jumped ahead here and forgot a crucial command. Okay, so what we need to do is we need to specify a layout for our window so that Maya understands where we want to put all these bits of UI. So we're going to use a really simple layout. So we're going to use something called a column layout. So I'm going to go cmds column layout. And I'm just going to go like this, and now when I run it, hopefully, kaboom, we've got a UI there. Okay, now what's actually happening is we can see a title is kind of in a corner, not a great position, and we can't really see any kind of evidence of a separator there. So what's actually happening is the separators kind of come in without any width. We could specify a width, so I'll just put in that just for the example. Okay, sorry, I need to spell width correctly. There we go. But actually, what's probably going to be easier, rather than having to do all this for all our UIs, a really nice thing to do is, I'm just going to get rid of this width, or what I tend to do, just to make things easier, is just set an attribute in here called adjustable column equals true. And basically what it will do is adjust all the UIs to fit the width of the column for you. Okay, great. There you are. And you see we've got Q Curator in the middle, and you see our separator, our little line going straight across the window for us. Perfect. Exactly what we want. Okay, so great. Let's move on and add the kind of bits that we want the user to interact with. Okay, so we're going to start off with a text field. Okay, so now what I could do is I could use I'm going to go, yeah, I could use cmds dot text field. So I need to go capitals. Let's just try that out. Let's see what that looks like. Have I got an error? Oh, I need to run this command as well. Sorry. Don't forget to run this bottom bit here to actually create an instance of the window. So here we are, I've got a text field, and user can enter data in there, and we can read that information, and that's wonderful, but it's not very informative, okay? I don't find that very useful, okay? And if we look at the documentation, so I just want to go to the documentation that we've got here. So this is all the Python documentation. And if I go into, I'm just going to go, is it text field? Text field. Okay, so if we go into text field, what you'll see is it belongs to the categories Windows controls. Okay, now if we click on controls, what this controls does, group of commands does, is basically these are all the different UI elements that we can add. Okay, so for example, if we look at text field, so here we have text field. Okay, but actually we also have something called text field group. And basically what text field group does, okay, is it basically adds, it's got a text field element, but combined with a label. Okay, so rather than me having to try and create like a separate label and text field, this one UI has got a label and a text field combined. So I tend to prefer to use this text group, and you'll see this convention used quite a lot. So for example, where we've got a slider, you can have just a slider or a slider group, i.e. grouped with a label, or you can have again, this is a float slider, but you can have it with a group. Okay, so you'll see that most of these things, radio buttons, I can have some radio buttons, or I could have it with a group. Okay, i.e. grouped with a label. Okay, so just be aware of that. If you go into this controls category, which I think, I'm trying to find the category here. So if you just look at categories here, it's actually under Windows controls. So if you click on that, you'll pull this up. So all the different UIs that we can have are under this control category. If you look for this sort of GRP group at the end of it, it just means that it's combining it with a text label for you, which saves you a lot of work. Now, another thing we can do is obviously we can just click on each of these. So if I go text field group, I'm going to click on that. Okay, and then I'm going to obviously it gives me loads of information about that command and all the different parameters that we can pass that command. But what I tend to do is scooch down to the bottom. Okay, and just run, just copy and paste a bit of code there. In fact, you don't really even need to do that, to be honest. You could just put in, I can just copy that, because we've used CMDS, so we're using the same convention in terms of naming the Maya class as they've used in the documentation, so everything should work quite nicely. So actually, without even passing any parameters to it, if I just remove this and just go CMDS text field group, hopefully now when I run this, kaboom, we have a text field group. It's not quite as we would want it, so maybe actually in this case having an example would be a better way of doing it. Let's just do that. So I am just going to go and run this example instead. Here we go. Control A. Let's run that. Okay, there you are. And you can see it's given it a name and it's put in here our text. So you can see we've got a label in there and we've got our text. That's absolutely brilliant. Okay, so I often find just, copy and paste an example in there, and it allows you to very quickly kind of get an idea of what the UI element actually is and what it does, because it's not necessarily obvious from the names, and obviously what you tend to find is in these descriptions you're kind of reading through it and you're trying to read through what it's telling you here, and it's kind of not very clear what this UI element does or what it looks like. So yeah, just copy and paste it in there, get an idea of what it looks like, and then hopefully a lot more of this will make sense. Okay, great. Okay, so short version of all this is I'm going to use a text field group, okay, to allow the user to specify. I'm creating a Windows interface here to allow the user to create a cube, okay, in this text field, I want the user to be able to actually just specify a name for their cube, okay. So the label is going to be cube name, and I like to kind of put like a colon at the end of it. I just find that neater. Okay, I think the text is editable by default, so I don't think you actually need to specify this attribute anyway, so that's fine. Okay, so I'm just going to go and do that. If I go Control A, let's run that. There we are, cube name, and now the user can enter a name. Brilliant. Okay, now remember, what's going to happen is I'm eventually going to have a button that the user clicks in order to create the cube, and then I need to read all the information that the user's entered. Okay, now in order to do that, I need to kind of store a link to this UI element within this class, okay, so that I can actually go to the UI element and read the data that the person's put in. Okay, so that's really important. So what I want to do is I want to just put in the front of this self. So remember, any data that I'm trying to store in the class, we start with the word self and then go dot whatever name we want to use. Okay, so I'm going to use the name cube name. Okay, so what this means is I can then access that piece of information via this cube name attribute, okay, that's part of this class. Okay, so rather than just rather than just creating the UI link, I'm storing a link. Does that make sense? To that piece of UI, so I can get back to it later. Okay. And you'll see me do that later on, but for the moment, let's just focus on the UI. Okay, so I'm now going to create. I want to create a set of fields that allows the user to specify the width, height, and depth of this cube. So I'm just going to go self.cube size, and I'm going to do this all in one interface. So I'm going to allow the user to do all this in one interface. I could, if I wanted to, create like a separate field or a separate slider for each of the width, height, and depth, but I want to put all this in one interface. And there's a number of options that we've got to do this, but I'm going to use cmds.float field group. Okay, so obviously the group means it's going to have a label on it, and float field group basically means that I can basically have as many float fields as I want. So I can specify a number of float fields, and it will just put them all next to each other and label them. Okay, so I need to specify how many float fields I want. So I've got my width, height, and depth. So I need 3. So I need 3 float fields. I'm going to give it the label just size. I do apologise. I do have a habit of sort of using these quotes and these quotes interchangeably. They are interchangeable, so please don't get confused by that. If I'm doing that, that's it's not going to cause a problem with our code. Okay. What are we? Label, and then what I want to do is I need to specify what I want to do is, in fact, I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I'm just going to go and just do this for a moment. Okay, so this will be the cube size. Let's just run that. Okay, there you are, blah, blah, blah. So give it a name and we can start it off with a size. Now I'm going to use this size to scale the cube. So this is going to affect the scale attribute of our cube. So really what I want is I want the starting values for each of these fields to be 1 rather than 0, okay? Because I think that's not going to be very... it's going to be a bit confusing if I do that, okay? So we can actually specify like a starting value in here, okay? So I can go, hey, value, so they're kind of indexed from value 1 to 3. So if I go value 1, that's the first field. So I go value 1 equals 1, okay? And then if I just run that, I need to put a comma in there, okay? I need to go equals rather than take away. What I'm going to do, I'm just going to put a line return in here, but that shouldn't cause a problem. I'm just going to just tab it along to there. That should all be fine. Right, let's just run that. Okay, so yeah, you can see it's set this to the value. It's just initialized this to the value 1, or give an initial value of 1. Okay, so I want to do the same thing, but for all the other ones. So I'm just going to just copy and paste this to make my life a bit quicker. Okay, so value 2 will also equal 1, and value 3 will also equal 1. And this is actually how we'll access the information that the users put into here as well. Okay, it's just for your information. Right, let's just run that. There we go, 1, 1, 1. Okay, brilliant. Okay, now next interface that I want to do is I want to allow the user to specify, and I'm doing this kind of on purpose because not necessarily because this is the best way of creating this interface, but really because I just want to kind of demonstrate some different interfaces for you as we do this. So I want the user to be able to specify the number of subdivisions on the cube, and I want them to be able to specify it using a slider. Okay, so again, I'm going to create a variable that we're going to store a link to this bit of the UI, or this piece of UI, or UI element. Okay, and I'm going to call that cube subdivs. Okay, again, I could call it whatever I want, but we've got to put the self dot at the start of it. Okay, so I'm going to go cmds dot int slider group. So this is the type of interface that we're using now. Let's have a look what that looks like. Kaboom. So this basically just gives us a slider here. It will allow us to specify a label. It's just I haven't specified a label just yet, but it's going to give us a slider that we can work with. Okay, let's give it a label. Okay, so I'm going to go. I'm going to go field equals true. So this is kind of interesting one. I think it doesn't actually. What this allows us to do is actually specify a text field that shows the value that the user's actually inputting using the slider, because it's not very useful feedback without that. Okay, and then what we can do is obviously specify a label. So I'm going to go label equals, and I'm just going to go subdivs. Okay, let's just go Control A. Okay, so yeah, this says subdivs, and then I can kind of specify it here. Now, these this controls kind of a little bit, kind of like the parameters on it, going from 0 to 100. That's by default. Okay, so we can change the min and max values here. Yeah, we can change the min and max values here, but to something a bit more sensible, because 100 is a little bit high for doing subdivs. So I can say, hey, again, I'm just going to return this to the line below. Okay, in fact, I'll just put some line returns just there, just to make it a little bit neater. Okay, and just make sure I put a comma at the end of this. Okay, so I'm going to return to the line below. You can put all this on one line. It's fine. It's just because it's so large, it's going to go outside of this sort of text area, and I just want to keep my codes reasonably kind of manageable, or you know, easier to read, as it were. So anyway, I can specify a parameter called min value, and just say, hey, that's going to equal 1, because you can't have subdivisions of 0. That doesn't make sense. Okay, and then I can specify another one called max value. Okay, and that can equal 10, so that's our maximum value. And then I can say, well, what's the initial value? So I can start that off with a 1. Okay, all right. So hopefully now, so you can see, but I'm sort of fine-tuning these attributes to make the interface behave the way I want. So now it could go a minimum of 1. It starts with 1, and it's got a maximum of 10. Okay, so you know, you can also, I think you can actually put like minimum, maximum values on your field groups as well, and so that's all possible as well. Great. Okay, next thing we're going to do. So I think the final thing I need to do is create a button. So this is the button the user is going to click in order to make a cube. Okay, so I'm going to go self dot. I'm going to call it cube create button. Okay, in fact I tend to go btn for button, just kind of keep it short. Okay, cmds.button. Okay, so that's what we use to create a button. I think, is it a lower b? Yeah, there we are. And hopefully let's just see what that looks like. Kaboom, yeah, there we are. Obviously, I haven't specified a label, so it's just going to be, label it with whatever. So let's specify a label. So I'm just going to go label, and I'll just call it create cube. Okay, there we are. Okay, so that's our UI created. Brilliant. Okay, so now what we want to do is we want it so that when we run this cube, we actually do something. So at the moment I can press that button, nothing's happening. I need to add the logic behind that button. Okay, so in order to do that, what I need to do is I need to so far we've just been working inside the constructor to define the user interface. I now need to create another function within this class, okay? And this function is going to be called when we click on this cube on this button, okay? Or the cube create button, or the create cube button, whatever you want to call it. Okay, so I need to kind of come back out here again. Hopefully I've got the kind of right. Here we go. I think that'd be about right. Okay, so I need to kind of define a new one, and I'm going to create a function called create cube. Okay, and then again I need to call it. Sorry, I don't want to put the colon there. I'm going to go self. So whenever you create a function inside a class, okay, you always have to pass self to it. Okay, especially if you want to actually use the access the attributes of that instance of the class. Okay, so if you want to actually access anything that's been called self in here, in order to do that you need to use self. Okay, so I'm going to pass self to it, and also what happens is Maya just passes a load of arguments to it. So whenever you press button, it passes a load of arguments to it about the button and the UI that called it and stuff like that. We're not going to use it, but because it passes it to it, we need to create somewhere for those arguments to go. So we just go star arguments. So even though we're not using those arguments, we still need to do that. So whenever you're creating any kind of function that's going to respond to a UI element inside of Maya, you need to kind of go self, and you need to put this args on there. Okay, so now what I'll do is I'll just go print button pressed, just to demonstrate that the button has been pressed. Let's just go like that. Oh, it doesn't like my indentation level, yeah, because this is a bit clunky what I've done here. Yeah. What I've done is I kind of copied and pasted this starting point. Hopefully that's going to fix it. Yes, it has. Okay, I copied and pasted this code from a document that I'd written earlier, and so the indents aren't very logical. You can see there's a big indent here, and so yeah, I should clean this up. It's not so easy to clean up in this UI, so I'm kind of avoiding that at the moment. But obviously, when you write it, hopefully you'll write it and get more logical indents. Okay, so just be careful of that. So this indent has to line up with that indent, otherwise it doesn't like it, and that's what the issue was. Okay, so sorry, now I've explained that. So that's all working, and if I press create cube, if I press create cube, nothing's happening. Well, hang on a minute, we wrote the function. What's going on? We need to tell this cube button to call this function. So we just go command equals, and we go self, okay, dot create cube. Okay, let's try that. Hopefully got to make sure I type everything in consistently. So now there we are, button pressed. So you can see, that is working nicely. So we now have some code that is responding to a button. Brilliant. Okay, so now what do we need to do? First thing we need to do is we need to read in all the information that the users put into this interface. Okay, so for example, if I'm going to put in, and what I'm just going to do is I'm just going to create local variables. I'm going to read it all in and just put it in some local variables. Okay, so to read it in, so the name that the user's inputted, remember the user was inputting the name using a what type of user interface was it? It was a text field group interface. Okay, now the way that this is kind of done in Maya with Python is really janky, right? It's kind of taken kind of like the Mel approach and then encapsulating that in Python. So you're just going to have to follow me on this one, but this is how it's implemented. Okay, all right. So yeah. Sorry, I need to just. Have I just gone to a different window there? Yes, I have. There, let's go back to the right window. Sorry about that. Right, okay. So, okay. So what we need to do is we need to call the same command that we used to create the UI element in order to read the UI element. Okay, all right. That might not make sense. Try and suspend all logic for the moment. Okay. So in order to read text field group, I actually want to use commands.textfieldgroup. Bang. Okay. Now what we're doing is by default, whenever you run the command text field group, you're running it in something called create mode. So what you'll find is all these commands that you have in Maya, or a number of these commands that you have in Maya, can be ran in different modes. So you've got create mode, you've got edit mode, which allows you to kind of edit that bit of UI, change the parameters in it, okay, such as the label. And you have the query mode, which allows you to read the UI, okay? So obviously what we want to do is we want to use it in query mode. So what we need to do is specify the UI that we're querying, okay? Because remember, we're just running the command here. So we're going to query this UI. And to say that we're querying it, we just go query equals true, okay? Now we need to tell it what parameter we're querying here, okay? And so the parameter we're querying is text, so that the text field is known as text. And then we just tell, and all we do is we say true next to the parameter that we're querying, okay? So yeah, so what we're saying is I want to go, it's a text field group, it's called cube name, we want to query it, i.e. look up some information in it, and the information we want to look at is the text that's been entered in the text field, and that's referred to as text. So you have to just go text equals true. It's a really clunky way of doing it, so you can't just go text. You have to go text equals true to say that we want that. So to demonstrate that we're doing that, then let's just go print name. Okay, so we've created this variable called name. Let's just print that off. Okay, so oh, by the way, if you're wondering how I'm running all this, what I'm doing, I just go Control A to select it all and then press play there. So if you're just wondering how I'm doing that, that's what I'm doing. And obviously, it's really important to make sure you run this at the end of it, because that's the bit that launches all of this code. Okay, all right. Without it, it doesn't get launched. It just sort of sits there. Okay. Great. I'm just going to put my name in there just for the hell of it. There you are, Mathew. Okay. And I go create cube, and you can see there you are. It's retrieved that bit of information from that bit of the UI, and it's now printed it off. So it's the same approach for all the other UI interfaces. Okay. So for width, I'm going to go. That's going to get equal. Okay. And remember, yeah. In fact, ignore it for the moment. So I'm going to go width, and that's going to be cmds float group. Here we are. And remember, this float group's got 3 values, so I'm actually going to use 3 separate commands in order to call each value and put it into a different variable. Okay. I'm sure it might be a more efficient way of doing it, but that's how I'm going to do it. Okay. We called it. What do we call it? Self.cube size. Okay, query equals true, and then this time we're not putting in text, we're putting in a value. And remember, normally if it was just like a single float field that we had, you would just go value, value equals true. Okay, but remember this has got 3 text fields. So actually, each text field's got its own attribute name. So the first one will be called value 1, the second one's called value 2, and the third one's called value 3. Okay, so yeah, we need to pull in each one of those. So I'm just going to go and just continue. I'm just going to copy and paste these down. So I think this one's going to be called height. So remember, the order of the values are going to be, well, in my mind, they're going to be X, Y, Z. So they're going to relate to width, height, and depth. Okay, so width will be that one. Height is going to be value 2. Depth is going to be value 3. Okay, next. Next thing we want to do is we want to pull in this slider value here. I'm just going to call it subdivs. I'm going to go that equals what do we call that? Self.cube subdivs. Okay. Oh, sorry, I haven't quite got that right, have I? I want to use the commands dot slider group here, and the first parameter always has to be the name of the actual UI element, okay, or a pointer to the UI element, and then these other parameters can be in whatever order you want, okay. So yeah, just remember that. So the name of it is self.subdivs. There we are. Again, we're going to go query equals true, and then we're going to go value. I think, yeah, it's just going to be value. So value equals true because it's just got one value to it. Brilliant. Okay, so that's pulled in all that information. Great. Now we want to do is final thing we want to do is use all that information to create a cube. Okay, so we're just going to use the cmds.polycube command to create our cube, and then we're just going to use all the different parameters. So name is going to equal name. Equal is what I want to put in there. Okay. Width is going to equal width. So the width is going to equal this width. So it's all pretty straightforward so far. Height is going to equal height. Depth. It's one little gotcha here. This is my typing the height wrong in again here. And I always have to double check this because I'm always typing height wrong there. So let's just correct that. So make sure I'm writing height correctly. Depth equals depth. Okay. So all I'm saying is, the name parameter in polycube in the polycube command should have the value inside of name. The name variable, the width parameter inside the polycube command should have the width variable. Blah 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 blah. Okay. And then obviously sub. I'm just going to. Just go return. Just continue this line here. So I think it's subdivisions width equals subdivs. Okay. And what I want to do is obviously specify. I'm going to use the same subdiv value to actually do the subdivs in the width, height, and depth. Okay. So the subdivs will, whatever I set in subdivs, it will affect all the dimensions of the cube. Again, just for this example. Okay. Okay, let's just make this a little bit wider so we can fit it all in. Okay. So what we want, subdivs height equals subdivs, and subdivs depth equals subdivs. Okay. In fact, actually, I might just put this onto a line below now. Great. Okay. So that should be our function. So if we go and run this now, okay. So I'm going to go, hey, new cube, and I'm just going to specify a size of 2, 3, and 4. And then I'm going to specify a number of subdivs. So I'll say I'm going to put like 3 subdivs in there, and I'll go create cube. There we are. It's created a cube. It's created a cube with the dimensions. So it's going to have a width of 2, a height of 3, and a length, a depth of 4, and it's put the 3 subdivisions in each side of it, and it's called it new cube. Okay, so hopefully, this will give you some ideas of how to create a UI, and obviously, hopefully, you can get the idea. You can apply this to your own Maya tools that you might want to create, or your own tools that you might want to create in Maya. Okay, have fun with that.